And welcome to Liquid Lunch, coming at you live. It's, what is today, Sandra?
Today's May 28th.
May 28th.
It's my ex's birthday.
Really?
Yes. And I texted him to wish him a happy birthday.
That's nice.
And I meant it.
Oh, that's even better. Yeah, great.
So Hugh, these digs are so different.
The what?
The digs are so different.
Yeah.
The space is so different. I'm so far from you.
Yeah.
For people who watch the show in the other space, I'm beside you and I can actually physically. I don't have that now.
You can hit me. Yeah, we've got, unfortunately...
I have to get a stick like James, our producer, says. Yeah, I gotta get a stick.
Hey, Sandra.
Yes.
So, first of all, we want to say hi to Ernest, who just called.
This show has the most amazing viewers. Just so friendly. Hi, Ernest. And is Ernest back in Toronto, or is he? Where are you living now, Ernest?
It's good that you mentioned that. He just moved to Ottawa.
Wow, you're in the capital city.
He's in the capital city, and he is calling from Ottawa. I don't know if what his mom says about the long distance bills.
Well, maybe he's going to Skype it.
Maybe. Well, he's not.
He's not Skyping.
No, and
Ernest,
we don't want to
get Skype.
We don't want to encourage him.
Get Skype.
Okay, so Sandra, first, we got before we get too much further in the show, we got Shawn Dalton coming in today. He's going to talk about Trudeau, the Trudeau legacy.
Okay, I have some really cool information on the Trudeau legacy.
Really?
In the Illuminati.
What? Get out.
Yes.
Like what?
In fact, you know what?
What?
If we can
get a video,
pull up George Green. He did an interview, George Green, on Conscious Media Network. George Green, he is part of the whole, he talks about what changed him and why he's defected from the Illuminati. And he mentions Pierre and Margaret Trudeau.
Oh, I think I know that guy. I know that interview.
Wow.
I
what do
know
you think?
that.
You're not going to pull it up then?
Well, this is what I remember. He's a guy that he says he worked for the Illuminati, and he was asked to manage different businesses and stuff for them.
He was a big financial guy.
And he talks about
in the Carter days.
In the Carter days,
yes,
there was a party somewhere down in the States, and all the big wigs, the politicians, big people from business and so forth, were there. And Pierre Trudeau was there with Margaret Trudeau.
Correct.
And there was a big bowl of cocaine that people were sampling from.
And it was Pierre's. Apparently.
What?
It was Pierre's.
No, I listened to that.
Pierre's. No. I listened to it on the weekend. It was Pierre's. What happened was basically he was being interviewed because he is actually trying to expose. He's got actually a website.
He's
so
defected
if you look at
from the Illuminati now.
Yes, and he's got a website. So if you look up George Green, you'll see his website. And anyway, so he was talking about what made him change, and it was a comment that Ted Kennedy made about his daughter. Right? And then he said, okay, you know what? That's it. I draw the line, because Ted Kennedy basically wanted to sleep with his daughter. And he said, no, you don't, Ted. That's my daughter, and she's 14. And he said, I don't care. And so that was when, for him, of course, I guess that struck that whole emotional, paternal chord. And so he said, okay, that's when he said, I don't really want to be a part of this. But of course, he thought that. He didn't say that. So what he did was he basically said, I need to kind of get away from this space. So he went over to Pierre and Margaret to talk to them, and noticed they had like a cigarette box, and it was full of cocaine. And he's like, oh my God, they're all. Okay. So go figure. I don't know if our guest is about pumping Pierre up, but this might not be.
I don't think he is, but
okay.
Okay, what I remember from that interview is that he didn't say necessarily that it was Pierre's.
In the piece that I saw, he was holding it. Pierre was holding it.
Oh.
It was I think it's like a cigarette box. Like, it looks like he thought he was taking out a cigarette, but he was definitely smoking it.
Smoking?
Or, I mean, whatever you do with coke. That's how square I am. See how I don't even. Whatever you do with that stuff. Oh my God. I am square.
Okay. Well, you're obviously not guilty.
Not of that. Other things, okay. Not that. Anyway.
Okay,
interesting. Interesting that I just happened to watch that this weekend, though. Talk about synchronicity. I just saw that 2 days ago.
Really?
2 days ago.
Because I've seen that interview too a couple times. And
wow.
I don't know what to make of it.
So, do you want to talk a little bit about?
Well, before we also we got Martin Weiner coming on the show,
Oh,
and
great.
I'm gonna have to check what we're gonna be speaking about with Martin, but looking forward to that as well
Excellent.
because he always brings great topics to the
Is,
show.
is he like out there or?
Well, Martin's a writer. I know that,
Oh,
and
okay.
he in fact
Nice.
writes for that paper, Good News Toronto.
Oh, excellent. So we
Yeah.
have like a positive journalist.
Yeah,
Excellent.
yeah.
Oh, that's good, especially since we're talking about the Illuminati. Nice to flip to the other side of the coin. That would be nice.
Yeah.
Excellent.
But let's talk a little bit about the talk that you're giving. I know you're giving a talk tomorrow. Where at
Yes.
Oisey? Is
Well,
it?
okay. No, it's not at Oisey.
Okay.
It was at Oisey,
Uh-huh.
and for some strange reason, there was a mix-up, and so now we've had to change it to Trinity St. Paul, downstairs in the Rainbow Room, which is 427 Bloor Street West, which is about a block west of Spadina on the south side.
Right.
But here's the really weird thing. I'm doing a talk. It's called Uncovering the Emotional and Mental Physics of the Human Experiment. And we're basically going to be talking about dimensions 1 through 5, and I have a speaker that will be talking with me, and he is an amazing man he's a biophysicist and has been doing many talks on quantum physics and medicine and vibration. He actually is an inventor as well. He actually creates vibrational products for healing and magnetic products. So you should actually, if you come, Hugh, ask him about your rings,
Oh.
because he'll know about that
Hey,
stuff.
who is this guy? What's his name?
His name is John Stewart, and he has his own company called Biophysica, and he creates. He was actually he created the humane shock therapy treatment that the hospital uses now. He created that like 20, 30 years ago. So he's an electrical engineer and a biophysicist, among many other. This man he built his first Tesla coil at age 10.
Really?
Yeah.
So he builds this stuff?
He's like a mad scientist, genius, protege.
And what is this?
BIO, Biophysica.
Okay, I'm not looking that up right now.
Oh, okay.
But,
Anyway, so we're doing a talk together, and I have a page on Meetup called Shift into One, and how I met John was he's also got a couple of pages on Shift on Meetup, and about quantum physics, and so we decided we were going to do this talk together, and so we just before we're about to promote it. The night before we do it, I go to look at his website, his Meetup page, and all of a sudden I get, this site no longer exists. And so I'm thinking, well, I don't know, something's wrong here. So I spent about an hour. I thought maybe I misspelled it or whatever, and because I had never been to his page before, so it didn't show up. So then the next day I get an email from him saying somehow mysteriously the site has gone down, and all of the people who are members, everybody has gone down. So now we don't have a place to promote the meeting, right? And he said, well, don't worry about it. I have a second Meetup site, so we can put it there. It's not as big, but it's got there are people who would be very interested in going. And so we go to try to promote on that site. A day later, that site goes down. Then he has a couple of other sites, 3 other local sites. They all go down. Everything goes down. Then, okay, so we're thinking, okay, somebody doesn't want us to talk. And then it's just too bizarre.
But why would they not want you to talk? What is it about this information that is so dangerous?
Because the nature of the discussion of this talk, what we're going to be talking about is exactly that, uncovering the emotional and mental physics of the human experiment. We are at a time now when we are actually uncovering the mental and emotional physics of those planes of our existence. As we've incarnated into this body and into this life as a human, we've evolved. We know that we've evolved from, the caveman days to, agriculture, industrial, information age. We're moving now into what they call the golden age or the spiritual age. So as we move up, we get to higher and higher levels of understanding and of awareness of who we are. We are now at the level where we are starting to uncover the actual emotional and mental planes of our existence. These are the actual planes of what we will be discussing are the tenets and the actual tenets that govern the actual emotional mental plane of the DNA blueprint of the origin of the species.
And okay. So what's going to happen? when we go through this, when we do this, what are we going to learn at this talk?
Well, we're gonna talk. It's going to be an introductory talk about this. It's going to be getting people aware of what this is all about. It's going to be opening up to this new understanding and this new development in our evolution. We're at the point now where we can actually talk about it and understand it and actually implement it. Now, the reason there's resistance is because once we start to understand this, Hugh, once we start to truly understand this stuff, we understand how extraordinarily powerful we are. And once we do that, any forms of control, like government and all of like education and the medical system, all of these establishments, these 3D structures, it starts to reveal that we no longer need them. Okay, so all of those forms of control, church and state, start to lose importance. They start to lose their appeal and attraction. And as people start to understand this more and more on a mass level, it unglues the government. We have to shift what we're doing. We have to shift how we function. We have to shift how we see things. They will have no choice because it'll be basically a form of awakening.
How's that going to work?
How is that?
What's it going to look like? I mean,
what is what going to look like?
That change where we realize we don't need these institutions anymore.
We will move in. What will happen is as those start to crumble, we will be creating space for new ones. So what will that eventually look like? That will look like a civilization where there's no hierarchy, where there is no money to be made for the sake of money. It will the understanding. Everybody, once we get to the higher level within that understanding, we will understand that everything is equal. So everybody and everything will have all that they need, and then we'll be able to explore who they are. They won't have to do something just for the sake of making money. It will be a very different way of seeing things, and it will be organic, and we will create through consciousness as opposed to, because consciousness creates. Above and beyond everything else, we will understand. See, when we get to that physical, when the emotional and mental physics, we understand that we create through fourth dimension. We create our reality through, it's our thoughts that create this reality, right? So once we understand what our thoughts are, and we change those thoughts, we change our whole reality. Does that make sense?
In theory.
Okay, this is about applying it. So what we will talk about there is actually making it real and actually applying it.
How do we apply it? Like right now, just give us one.
Okay, so how do you apply it? Okay, well, you're creating your reality right now because you have been for a while. Everybody's creating their reality whether they know it or not. It's just whether we're conscious or unconscious, okay? So if you choose to buy into a system, okay, for example, I know somebody who had an issue with breast cancer. So there was a breast cancer scare. So what does she do? She goes online. She starts looking. She starts looking online to all this information about the possible forms of breast cancer and what you need to do and this and everything else. Okay, so she's looking at medical establishments. So already she's creating fear. And she's disempowering herself instead of going within and trying to understand it from within. Everything in our life is a result of something we've brought to us. So instead of looking at, okay, so what have I done to create this situation in my life? She goes outside of herself, and then she goes for all of the, biopsies and everything else. So the system is making money off of her. She's getting chunks of her skin taken out of her breast taken out of her, okay? And to find out that there was nothing to begin with. It was just an anomaly. So afterwards, we spoke, and I said, you have a choice. You can look at this from a place of fear, or you can look at this from a place of empowerment, okay? And you can choose to look outside of yourself for potential solutions, or you can choose to look inside of yourself. She chose to look outside of herself, but she created that reality. Okay, if she worries enough energetically, if she worries and focuses enough on it, she will actually bring it to life. She will actually manifest that and say, see, told you they were right. No, they weren't. You were. You created that because you bought into a system outside of yourself. Okay, so we need to change the way we look at things. This is understanding. Again, this is about uncovering that emotional and mental physics. So that's an example of how to change your perspective. So for you, for instance, you are creating this great environment. You have this great space, right? You have been hosting the show for a very long time. You're not necessarily conscious of yourself doing this.
Mm-hmm.
It was just a passion. It was just a love.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if you want to change certain things in it, change the way you see it. If you want to change your relationship with somebody, that's another thing people ask. Okay, I can't stand a person I'm working with. How do I need to change them? No, you can't change anybody. You change the way you see them, and then they will change. Guaranteed, they will change.
How do you know all this, Sandra?
How do I know all this? Oh my God. How do I know this? Because I've experienced it. Because I'm the embodiment of it.
Okay. All right.
Because I'm basically a version of the new human of where we're going.
Okay, so people can come see this talk tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right?
So yeah, can I
Yeah.
just a couple of other things, okay? Just
Yeah.
to make things even more confusing. Okay. So then, last week, guess what happens to me? I go for a walk. I'm going for a walk. It's a Saturday night. I'm going for a walk. And I'm by my dad's place, which is by the Dufferin Eglinton area. And he said, Sandra, it's a little late. Maybe you shouldn't go because it's getting dark. And I'm like, Dad, you know what? I'll be back before it's dark. So I'm going for a walk. The police come by. They slow down. They look at me, but they keep going.
Mm-hmm.
Something's up. So then I walk around the corner. I get stopped by the police.
Mm-hmm.
They start questioning me.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently there was an armed robbery 5 minutes before, and I fit the description to a T. To a T. So now I'm being questioned.
Right.
Now they have a second cruiser coming, a third cruiser coming. They stop traffic. People are coming out of their houses, and I am like a fish in a fishbowl.
Mm-hmm.
And they kept me for about a half an hour, and then they let me go. But there's another thing about resistance. And then 2 nights ago, all of a sudden, the original place for the talk gets canceled, and so we have to scramble to find a new place.
So what does that all mean?
I think it's just all resistance, energetic resistance of moving forward. And actually, when the venue was canceled, I thought, you know what, maybe I should just not even do this talk. And my friend said, no, I think this is the reason you should do this talk. Not do this talk. I think there's more reason to do it. So we were, and I thought, okay, you know what? I'm just going to leave it up to my higher self. And if I get a venue, because we had like 24 hours to try and get a venue, and short notice, and so a venue came up. So I thought, okay, well maybe that's my sign, and so we're going to continue with the talk. But you got to wonder. I know this sounds really crazy and do stuff, but you got to wonder when you have all of these kinds of things happening. You got to wonder if there's something to it,
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well.
Yeah.
Okay, so people can still come to this talk, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
how do they get more info?
All they have to do is check the Shift Into One meetup page.
Yeah.
I also have a website, shiftinto1.com. They can
Okay.
go to,
All right.
and or email me at Sandra@shiftinto1.com.
And if people are watching this after May 2012, they can get in touch with you and find out when the next event
Yeah.
is anyway, right?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
great.
Go to the website, shiftinto1.com.
All right. So let's. Shawn is here. Let's get ready for Shawn. But before we bring him on the show, have you heard about this Victoria Grant girl
Yes.
who gave?
Yes.
Who talks about the banking system?
Yes.
What-
Isn't she amazing?
Do you have any comments about that?
Well, I think she's right on.
Absolutely.
I think she's right on. I think a lot of people are talking about it. A lot of people have mentioned it even before. She's 12, right?
Yeah.
Even before this wonderful little soul mentioned it. But for whatever reason, because she's a 12-year-old, she's getting a lot of attention with it.
Well, also, I
And-
think one of the great things she's done is there's a lot of documentaries out there that kind
she's
of
just-
describe all the problems. The Money Masters. There's a whole bunch of them out there, but she kind of sums it all up in a 6-minute speech. All the important points that all these documentaries are trying to make. She sums it up in a 12-minute
Yes, she does,
speech.
and she does it beautifully. She's a brilliant little girl, and I think she's definitely a crystal child. Do they call them crystal
Well,
children
sure.
or rainbow children?
They're
or
one better than the Indigos, crystals.
Not better, just different.
Yeah, but
Just different.
well, she might be. Some people say, "Oh, her parents put her up," but that's not the point. The point is that and whether it's entirely possible she did it herself, and the real point is the points that she's making are the ones that we need to. I think we need to pay attention to, and we need to act on it. So
Yeah.
why don't we watch that video? This
Sounds
is
good. She's amazing.
It's gone viral, totally gone viral. This is she was brought down to Pennsylvania to deliver the same speech to some forum on public banking.
I'm surprised she's not there's not resistance around her.
Well, we got to get the word out. If you haven't seen it already, here it is.
absolutely.
Victoria Grant
She's,
speaking to, I
amazing.
forget who she's speaking to, someone down in the U.S. So let's watch this. We're going to come back with Shawn Dalton to talk about Trudeau and his
Yay.
legacy, good or bad.
Known or not known, maybe we'll
Right.
find some secrets.
Yes. We'll be right back.
It was about 5 or 6 weeks ago that Victoria spoke to a group of 600 people at a Rotary Club, and she's going to be giving the same speech to us today. And I saw it, I think a week or so after it hit the web, it started going around, and so I quickly got on the phone and talked with her dad Zane and invited them here. And so we have a very special treat. So Victoria, come on up, do your thing. Go up.
Have you ever wondered why Canada is in debt? Have you ever wondered why the government forces Canadians to pay so many taxes? Have you ever wondered why the bankers from the largest private banks are becoming wealthier and the rest of us are not? Have you ever wondered why the gross national debt is over $800 billion? Or why we are spending $160 million a day on the interest of the national debt? That's $60 billion a year. Have you ever wondered who receives the $60 billion? What I have discovered is the banks and the government have colluded to financially enslave the people of Canada. I will share with you 3 important points of reference which will hopefully spark enough interest and concern for you to continue the research on your own and to engage your government to stop this criminal act against the people of Canada. First, we will briefly examine the Bank of Canada. Second, we will see how our banking system works today. And lastly, I will offer a viable solution that we can petition our government to implement. A very little known figure in Canadian history is J.L. Gradon McGeer. He was a lawyer, member of Parliament, and Mayor of Vancouver. His contribution to Canada is probably the greatest in our history. He championed the creation of the National Bank of Canada, whose sole purpose is to create and manage Canada's money. It was formed on July 3, 1934, and owned by all Canadians. Until the 1970s, because of the Bank of Canada, Canada's national debt was held at a constant, manageable level, until the government decided to implement what we now have as our modern-day banking system that is robbing the Canadian people. So how are they robbing us? Allow me to explain how our private banks and government work today. First, the Canadian government borrows money from the private banks. They then lend the debt-based money to Canada with compounded interest. The government then continues to increase taxation of Canadians year after year in order to pay back the interest on the exponentially growing national debt. What results is inflation, less real money for Canadians to spend into our economy, and the real money being used to pad the pockets of the banks. Also, the government gave the banks the ability to loan out money that doesn't exist in the form of loans. When a bank gives you a mortgage, which literally means a death pledge, or a loan, they don't actually give you money. They click a key on a computer and generate the fake money out of thin air. They don't actually have it in their bank vaults. Presently, the banks only have $4 billion on reserve, but they have loaned out over $1.5 trillion. To quote Graham Towers, each and every time a bank makes a loan, a new bank credit is created. New deposits, brand new money. Broadly speaking, all new money comes out of a bank in the form of loans. As loans are debt, then under the present system, all money is debt. What I find interesting is even Jesus, in Matthew 21, drove out the money changers in the temple because they were manipulating the currency to steal money from the people. The private banks are just like the money changers in Matthew 21. They are defrauding and robbing the people of Canada thus their freedom, and they need to be stopped. How should the banking system work? In an infamous interview, Mr. McGeer asked Mr. Towers, "Can you tell me why a government with power to create money should give that power away to a private monopoly and then borrow that which Parliament can create itself back at interest to the point of national bankruptcy?" Mr. Towers replied, "If Parliament wants to change the form of operating the banking system, then certainly that is within the powers of Parliament. In other words, if the Canadian government needs money, they can borrow it directly from the Bank of Canada. The people would then pay fair taxes to repay the Bank of Canada. This tax money would in turn get injected back into our economic infrastructure and the debt would be wiped out. Canadians would again prosper with real money as the foundation of our economic structure and not debt money. Regarding the debt money owed to the private banks, such as the Royal Bank, we would simply have the Bank of Canada print the money owing, hand it over to the private banks, and then clear the debt with the Bank of Canada. Yes, we have the power and lawful right to do so. In conclusion, it has become painfully obvious, even for me, a 12-year-old Canadian, that we are being defrauded and robbed by the banking system and a complicit government. What will we do to stop this crime? What will we do to ensure that the next generation will live free and clear of the debt-based economy that enslaves them to the banks? Margaret Mead said the following, and I hope that all of you remember this. "Never doubt that a small group of people can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." Thank you.
And there you go. So there's Victoria Grant.
She's
Right?
amazing. She's amazing.
So if she can get away with doing that, Sandra, you should get away with doing what you're going
That's
to be
what I
doing.
don't know. Isn't that kind of strange, eh? I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Well, we're going to find out tomorrow.
Well,
And people, like they said, can reach you at shiftinone.com.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Okay. So let's
Keep
we've
going,
got,
girl. You go, Victoria.
Yes, absolutely. And we got Shawn Dalton here. Shawn, I don't know. Do you want to use that as a springboard in any way to what we're talking about today with Trudeau?
Well, yeah,
we're gonna have
because
fun having this
Sean's
Trudeau
predicting
discussion.
she's going to be the next. Well, not the next prime minister. Maybe not the next prime minister, but a future prime minister, right?
I bet Sean thinks she'd be better. We asked him to talk, and yet we're hogging the mic. But he said, I bet Sean would prefer her over Justin Trudeau, right, Sean?
Yes, I would actually.
Yeah, I know. Because
Take it
we're
you're
going to
not a
get into the
fan.
whole Trudeau thing today, right?
Yeah.
It was funny because Sandra. Anyway, let's not mention that again. But
Okay,
I'm not
all
sure I
right.
believe that. But
Okay.
Anyway, Sean, let's talk about Trudeau.
Yeah, he backpacked around the world with just a sack for a couple of years. Like he went to Europe, he went to the Middle East, he went to South America, and he saw a lot of violence, carnage, mayhem. And when he returned to Canada, and Quebec was exhibiting nationalistic sentiments, he believed that there was something wrong with Quebec, and that was one of his ideas for the Charter of Rights, Freedoms, and Multiculturalism. That's where he got the idea from. He thought he needed to nullify Quebec, or else Canada would become the next Nazi Germany.
Why? Because he saw Quebec's nationalism as a problem, a threat to Canada?
Yeah, he did.
Okay, because he mentioned, it's one way for the rest of us here in Canada, it's a good thing that he felt so strongly as a Canadian that he would want to, if Quebec was a threat to national unity, for him to take action, be a statesman to keep the country, united as one Canada.
I think on your last show you said we're trying to have a country here, and there's a huge difference between nationalistic sentiment and multicultural ideology, whereas a Charter of Rights and Freedoms sets out a specific example for how society is going to be grouped, i.e. language, and language defines culture. So the French, identifying French as the second language was a good thing. Like, I agree with it completely. I know both languages, so I have a biased opinion. I went to French immersion school, and I can speak both of Canada's official languages. The bad thing about the multicultural enchantment into our charter is it recognized minority languages as well. And they're wondering why we don't speak their language, or we're not writing things in their language. So it's almost like it gives them a sense of false entitlement. It's like English has been the language of the majority for, it probably always will be. But there's demands in Vancouver where their population of Asian people from China is reaching 50%. And they're pushing for Mandarin and Cantonese to be the third and fourth major languages. And when I was on the street of Toronto, I mentioned this to several people just as a feeler. And they seemed to think, oh, well, that's ridiculous. And I said, well, you think it is? Like demographic, everything's based on demographics. So, if you want to preserve English and French, you have to specifically define English and French in the charter and take out the multicultural component. The government should not be in our charter. It gives minorities the same rights as English and French speaking people.
Do we have the clause from the charter and exactly what the wording is? By any chance? Just to see what it is.
That's a good point.
I might have that actually. Let me just.
It's a very interesting dilemma because this is indicative of, I think, a lot of the situations that we're having here in Toronto. I don't know if other places across the country are feeling these kinds of things, but this whole multiculturalism, excuse me, in terms of getting jobs that are working within government jobs like police and that kind of thing, there's almost by some people's accounts, a reverse discrimination going on, because if you're not, a female or a certain
or a minority
ethnicity, yes, you won't get the job.
I just found it. Do you want me to read it?
Go ahead.
Okay. The Multicultural Act. The act goes from the general to the concrete by authorizing the minister responsible to, quote, take such measures as the minister considers appropriate to A, encourage and assist individuals, organizations, and institutions to project the multicultural reality of Canada in their activities in Canada and abroad. C, encourage and promote exchanges and cooperation among the diverse communities of Canada, whatever that means. E, encourage the preservation, enhancement, sharing, evolution, expression of the multicultural heritage of Canada. And H, provide support to individuals, groups, or organizations for the purpose of preserving, enhancing, and promoting multiculturalism in Canada. And I don't believe it means anything specific. It's just a fluffy, definition.
But does it talk about the languages there?
Well, to preserve, enhance, and promote multicultural, or to support individuals, groups, or organizations for the purpose of preserving?
It's a broad. I think there's a lot of room for interpretation. I think it's not specific on purpose. I think that it's in some ways it can be seen as smoke and mirrors. In some ways it can be seen as not really addressing anything.
In this book, Selling Illusions, The Cult of Multiculturalism by Neil Bissendath, it was a bestseller, and it continues to sell out every year. Like, you can barely get a copy of it in chapters.
Selling Illusions.
Usually you have to wait for orders to come in, because when 20 come in, one person comes in and buys 5 or 6 for their friends. It's such a shocking book.
What's it say? The
Cult of Multiculturalism. This gentleman is from Trinidad. He came to Canada in 1973, and he rejects the hyphenated Canadian, to where he said, I'm a Canadian, pure and simple. I speak English. I live in this country, So
is this a stand you're taking?
I have to.
Yeah.
It's I can only become friends with people that speak the same language as me. I can't understand people that speak different languages. It's just, I took kickboxing for 5 years, and all my sparring partners went back to China. They were working graveyard shifts in restaurants, and they were really good martial artists, and I lost a lot of good friends, and it really hurt. And my sensei, Yuri, he moved the dojo 2 times, once from Victoria Park to Midland, because he needed a place with lower revenue, rent costs, because as the students left, he didn't have any new ones to come in. And, it was really hard to understand my sparring partners. Like, we'd have to wait until it was interpreted to Mandarin to English. They could fight, but there was no unity in the dojo. We were very divided.
See, that's a really good point. And talking about our the talk that I'm doing actually ties into this, because this is a good example of saying, okay, how do we grow with the country? Because obviously the country is very different now than it was when the charter was first created. How do we do this in a way that includes everybody, so that everybody's happy and nobody is excluded? How do we do this in a way that's realistic, reasonable, viable, and inclusive?
We have to have some standards. We have to define who we are first, and only when we define who we are can we tell other people who we are, and we can share that with them. We can.
So part of defining who we are is finding the common denominators.
Yeah,
it's
like
let's look at ways to bring us together, not ways to separate us.
Yeah, and multiculturalism, for all the things bragged about it actually creates more division than unity. It identifies the differences that we have between groups instead of the common shared values that we have together as citizens, like the English language, sports, hockey, basketball, baseball, maple syrup, the northern lights, the things that make Canada Canada, the beauty about the country.
It doesn't mean we can't, at the same time, Shawn, it doesn't mean we can't celebrate the differences in the cultures and how they can enrich the community, enrich the country, because there are some great dishes from India and from other places of the world that are Thai food and that kind of thing that I was never exposed to until I moved to Toronto and was more aware of the multiculturalism.
That's probably the only good thing about it is the food. Like, I've been to some of the cultural events.
Well,
and
I think some of their spiritual attitudes.
I didn't understand what was going on half the time, and I was, even the people that invited me. Like, I went to an Aboriginal Urban Alliance event for Christmas, and they did their shows and things, and even the people who were invited who were not Aboriginal, they kind of looked like a little bit horrified or shocked because someone was screaming, and that's just the way they do their thing, their thing. And I was kind of shocked, but I wasn't horrified. I was just shocked that I'd never seen anything, and I didn't understand the whole spiritual component of it. But I had a little taste of it, and I wouldn't pay to go and see something like that. I want to go to something that's familiar to me. And that's just my preference. Like, I just prefer, things that I'm interested in.
Well, that's one point right there. Just to say with that's my preference, you said, that I'd rather,
Yes.
People are, like, human nature is such that, I think we're as emerging from a more primitive
Society?
culture,
Yeah.
society, where we're tribal on one level, because out of self-defense, we recognize those in our tribe, and we want to work with our tribe to protect ourselves against external threats.
I've
right?
become more tribal in the last. I'm ashamed to admit it. I've become very tribal. It's.
What does that mean?
Means I've become more conservative as a person. I've stopped looking at myself as a citizen of the world and more as a citizen of Canada, because that's where I was born. That's what I'm familiar with. Those are where my values are. That's where I make my money. That's where I make my friends.
Well, that leads to a whole bunch of other topics too, and I don't know if we're going to get a chance to touch on them. But this tribal nature of human beings, at its worst, comes out as racism.
It does, and it can also lead to civil war and the disintegration of some countries.
Absolutely.
Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Lebanon. These countries lived side by Yugoslavia. These countries lived side by side, but they had nothing in common. They just tolerated each other. And then once demographic things became too prominent, they disintegrated into civil war. I mean, Sri Lanka is the perfect example. Tamils and the Sinhalese, and Muslims all lived together in one country on an island, and you'd think that there's enough for everybody, but there was nothing. They had nothing in common with one another. So,
but doesn't this a lot of this stem from again, that whole hierarchy thing, the whole education thing, and the whole separation thing, the whole ego mentality?
Well, in Lebanon, it sure did, because the Maronite Christians were in control of a lot of the businesses, and when the Palestinians came in, they wanted to, claim part of it for their own, and they didn't have a place to live, right?
Right.
So they didn't have an identity. So they took their identity as an anti-American, anti-Israeli position, and they started firing rockets into northern Lebanon, thereby dragging Israel into a war, and Lebanon's now a failed state. But the point is, you had the Shiites, the Sunnis, the Maronites, and the Alui living together side by side with nothing in common, and there was a lot of tension.
Well, here's the reality of the world is that we have to live side by side with each other everywhere, not just in Canada.
But wait a second. What do you mean nothing in common? Okay, at the end of the day, we're all human.
Of course.
Okay,
right, so we have a lot in common.
It takes more than just being a human being to have look at Sudan. It just succeeded.
My point is, should it though? Should it take more than that? Isn't the rest just okay? Go ahead. Sorry, Hugh.
It's like we have to. We're tribal on one level. So when at our worst, it's racism, right? But fortunately or unfortunately, the reality of the world, not just in Canada, but all over the world, and the example you just gave is one, where you have different groups living side by side. Now, either they got to learn to live with one another, or there's going to be civil war.
But why do we, again, here's that attitude thing. Why do we have to learn to live with somebody or with one another? Why can't we appreciate?
Sure. Okay, but you can appreciate it, and maybe I can appreciate it, but not all. But when you see cultural, racial strife,
gender
anywhere
discrimination
in the world.
Only because of course it does, and you could be affected by it. They could come after. I understand that. What I'm saying is, that's all the result of oppression. Okay, again, back to what we were talking about earlier. If everybody was given equal opportunity, all over the world. We wouldn't be seeing these different cultural differences.
You work for the NDP?
No, I work for the universe.
Right.
Look, here, I just want to make my point here, and that is that with this human nature that comes out at its worst as racism, when you start to have a country like Canada that adopts multiculturalism as an official policy, then you, I think, have to be very careful about how you manage that process as it unfolds.
Yeah, but it's a government program. It's not my culture. Like, there's a difference between.
All I'm saying,
Yeah.
whether it's a government program or whether it's an inherent natural tendency of global geopolitics, somebody should keep an eye on it, because you don't want our country, our community, to suffer if things start to go badly, whether it's because the economy can't keep up, and that exacerbates differences between cultural groups.
It has suffered severely. I'll give you an example. My editor, Sophia, she, when we were talking on the phone about, we're working on a book, by the way, on the 3 myths of Canadian immigration. And,
3 myths of Canadian immigration.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Wow.
she said that, she goes, Shawn, before 1967, Canada was a pretty unified country, for better or for worse. We were pretty confident, pretty good growth rate economically. We had our differences, but we were a bilingual country, a French and English-speaking country. And then came Trudeau, and then came the Charter. Now, Quebec was the only holdout. They never signed it, but the charter was supposed to be for Quebec. It was supposed to recognize the French language as the equal to English,
Well,
which
it was
is fine.
Trudeau's idea. Trudeau was trying to repatriate the Constitution, make it uniquely Canadian and not British, and yes, to include Quebec in one unified constitutional understanding.
Yeah, but they didn't sign it because of the multicultural provision.
Well, they didn't sign it for a lot of reasons.
That was one of the main reasons.
Well,
'cause
the real,
French would have been just another language. It wouldn't have had special privilege, and that would have
arguably,
destroyed
who
their
was the
culture.
premier at the time? I believe it was,
Bourassa, was it?
was it?
I think it was. I think he
Okay.
started the. That's why the Bloc Québécois was formed. It was a defensive mechanism.
Well, the PQ came along before that, before the Constitution.
Yeah, but they weren't gonna it got steam after the charter was passed. Like, Quebec really became, once they realized what it was that they were trying to do to them, they.
Well, what Trudeau was trying to do with that was to really truly unify the country, and unfortunately, Quebec, because of its politics, I forget who the premier was. Let's say it was Bourassa, but he was
Bourassa.
under a lot of pressure because, of course, he's got to get reelected, and he's up against the PQ, to keep, the electorate in Quebec happy, and a lot of that electorate is ready to vote to separate at any time. So those people, just by the fundamental fact of their politics, don't want to recognize anything that's going to unify them with the rest of the country.
The worst part is the French-speaking people were already a minority in an English-speaking country, so we already had to tread carefully initially. Like, it was already a sensitive situation.
It's still a sensitive situation.
What ended up happening was the Bloc rose to prominence, and as a defensive mechanism, they passed signage laws, all French. You can't have an English signage, right?
Wait a sec. That was before the BQ came along.
I think it was after the charter. I think it was in 1984. They passed the signage laws.
Well, they were doing that even back in the 70s. I believe.
I think it was after the charter was signed.
Okay. Well, we'll just leave that.
I'll look
for
into
now.
it, though,
But it
because-
is something that they wanted to do. The PQ was afraid that under the pressure of English culture globally, that they were losing their French.
Heritage.
Yeah, heritage. Yeah, because the language defines heritage.
So they're acting to protect that.
But once they passed the signage laws, that created a predicament for the English businesses, and there was quite a few of them in Quebec. And in the 30-year period, they packed up shop and moved to Toronto. And the center of gravity moved from Montreal to Toronto, and they're now a welfare province. They got more transfer payments than any other province in the country. So that hurt them. You see the riots right now, 2,500 people in prison, So, and we're no less unified as a country.
So what would you like to see then?
I'd like to see the government promote French and English, and that's it. I don't want to see the government promote anything else. I don't want to see the government promoting other people's languages. That's a threat to our language. I also got an article, I don't know if you guys were aware of this, from the South Asian Times paper. It's a list of statistical analysis of all the source countries and how well they're doing in Canada or how well they're not doing,
in terms of their
economic
integration, whatever you want to call
Yeah,
it.
the Americans are doing the best, followed by the UK, and then Africa, then Hong Kong. But near the bottom, you have the most tribal countries. You have Pakistan, West Central Asia, and the Middle East. And surprisingly, the People's Republic of China is second last.
So what is this saying?
Let me see that, Sean.
It's the incomes made by people.
Well, who says that these are the most tribal countries? Is there an index that shows which countries are the most tribal?
No, but tribalism basically means people that usually stick to their own culture more so than others. And
But
Pakistan.
there's no
Oh.
objective way to
like
define how
clan-ish.
tribal a culture
No, that's
is.
just based on my experience, right? Like,
Okay.
I find people, more, who have more of an education, more open-minded, say people that want to huddle in their own groups, right? Like, there's more people, in general, will want to huddle in their own groups than other people. I mean,
Okay.
depends how open-minded you are.
All right. Let's.
Wow.
Geez, Sean, we gotta. You brought a lot of books, and we haven't talked too much about Trudeau, other than giving him the blame
I've got
for.
one quote I'd like to read out of
multiculturalism.
this Trudeau book about the Charter. Do you mind if I do that? Or?
Sure.
Okay, this book's called Trudeau's Shadow: The Life and Legacy of Pierre Elliott Trudeau, edited by Andrew Cohen, who's I think he works at the Globe and Mail. I think he's an editor, and J.L. Grandstein is probably the best historian in the country. He's written over 60 books about Canadian history and politics, and
Yep.
he's won a Emeritus and Honor of Canada. So these
Wow.
are pretty smart people. Okay. At the cusp of the millennium, the Charter has become a surrogate citizenship, a summary description of Canadianism for a clear majority of Canadians. If, as a nation state, Canada is, quote, not a real country, end quote, the Canadianism the society nurtures has become a passionately held conviction. Much of this Canadianism we owe to Trudeau, bilingualism, multiculturalism, cultural and racial diversity, regional variety, tolerance, civility, internationalism, the equality of all provinces, a presumption that does not require them to be treated as identical, but ensures that they will feel full partners in the whole, and the equality of all citizens, bracketed and finely calibrated Canadian ambiguity with a recognition of the need to nurture group rights and identities. For a regionalized, decentralized, multinational, pluralistic, and heterogeneous nation state without a distinctive language or a dominant ethnic group, condemned to be influenced deeply by its superpower neighbor, the States, that list adds up to an inspirational projet national. If the United Nations is any credible judge, Canada is on track towards fulfilling that project. So we're basically a people without an identity, and if we do have one, we're encouraged not to promote it or identify it, or, as he said before, you'd be accused of xenophobia or racism. However, it's really silly because every country in the world has a core identity and a core culture, and it usually comes from the language they speak, the sports they play, the political institutions they have, the school systems, the colleges, the artists, the people who make contributions towards overall society, the people who
So then, is this more than just about language?
It is. Like, I think being a Canadian means something. I think it has a specific spiritual and physical reality. And I think a lot of people who've lived in this country long enough end up feeling it on some level and basically understand what it is. And I think it's in the government's interest to tell people who come to Canada, Canadians are special people. They speak French and English, but beyond that, they're also highly educated and, they like hockey a lot, and they also like basketball and baseball and...
I'd like to see you write the charter and see how you would change it compared to what it is today. That would be really neat.
I would scrap it and implement something that the states have, like a bill of rights.
That's exactly. And speaking more maybe about what it is to be what it is to be Canadian as opposed to be multicultural.
I would base it on individual liberal values with a small L, not on group rights. I would never base it on group rights. I don't think groups should have any special entitlement. Why should a group have special privileges over the individual? Our society was freed by liberal democracies over the tyranny of the group, the communism, socialism, fascism, Nazism, egalitarianism. These group people.
So you think, in your opinion, Sean, that the states, they're
run the country. Don't tell me
what
my
better.
Culture is.
They're better. That you think it's worded better. They're.
Well, see, I think Trudeau had a big problem trying to bring a constitution into being with the whole country as part of that debate, because that's what was happening. I mean,
how else do you do that?
Not just the premiers were talking about it, but people all over the country were talking about it. It's very difficult to do that. I think the way you got to do a constitution is you have to come up with it first and say, this is the constitution. Who's with me?
He's responsible for the unification of the rest of the country outside Quebec. When he passed the NEC policy, which is National Energy Coalition, it fixed the price of oil at a certain, I think it was like $5. But the world price after the oil Arab embargo went up to about $20. So what happened was in Alberta, oil rigs packed up and went south because they want to sell their product at the world price. They want to make the most profits. But the result was hundreds of thousands of people in Alberta lost their jobs. And out of that resentment came the Reform Party.
Well,
And they took the shell of the Conservatives after Mulroney tried to de-annex old age pensions. They filled it with their own people, restructured it, and now they have a majority. So democracy does work. It just takes a while. And I figured this out last week, and it was one of those moments where you're like, oh my God,
That's an aha moment.
Yeah, aha moments, exactly. I kind of connected all the dots, and it was really shocking.
I know Trudeau gets a bad rap for the national energy policy now, but
Well, the Albertans have never forgotten it.
well,
and,
one of the things that came out of that, I think, was a kickstart to the oil sands, because Trudeau, with nationalized oil companies, went in there and started to, and that's why he fixed the price higher, because at the time that oil sands oil was uneconomical to produce. So I think he, and I could be wrong about some of this, but I think he kind of kickstarted the oil sands development. Now you can be for that or against it. A lot of people are against it for environmental reasons, but
when he started, Canada in 1967, Canada's debt total was $20 billion. By the time 1982 rolled around, almost 20 years later, we had a $200 billion deficit. He created the Canada Pension Plan, the National Energy Coalition, and these things cost billions of dollars. He spent 50% more in revenue than was coming in every year of his term for a 20-year period. That's where the deficits of today came from, most of them anyway. It's expensive to pay for his ideas.
Okay, now I'm going to, because I've kind of been arguing I've been on the pro-Trudeau side of the argument, or of this discussion so far, right? But now to kind of, you mentioned just to kind of look at the other side of it for a minute, because you mentioned Trudeau was traveling all over the world with his backpack. Well, apparently he did a lot of canoeing over in Siberia.
He did. He actually canoed all over the country.
He was there in the 50s, was he not? In the 50s, canoeing around Siberia. What was that?
What's the weather
Nixon
like
didn't
in
even
Siberia?
go to China till 1972.
What's
What's Trudeau doing canoeing around?
Okay, first of all, do you have to wear a parka? Isn't Siberia cold?
It's just like northern Canada.
Okay.
Do you want me to read?
You're feeling right at home then, right?
Do you guys want me to read some quotes that he said he was famous
Sure,
for? Okay.
yeah.
So these are some of the statements that Mr. Pierre Trudeau said. Okay, this is what he said in 1958. I believe in the necessity of state control to maximize the liberty and welfare for all. He said this in 1971. We have a great deal to learn from the Soviet Union, and we know the Soviet Union collapsed.
Wow.
He said this in London, England, January 13th, 1969. Trudeau was asked by British students, "What society would you like to make Canada?" To which he replied, "Labour Party socialist, or Cuban socialism, or Chinese socialism. Socialism for each according to his means." End quote. This is what he said in an interview to CTV in 1975. We haven't been able to make it work, the free market system. The government is going to have to take a larger role in running institutions. It means there's going to be not less authority in our lives, but perhaps more.
I smell
He said this in 1979, March 15th in Vancouver. It doesn't matter where the immigrants come from. And that's kind of ironic because the Asian population has grown so fast in Vancouver that people are calling it the next Quebec. Like they're pushing for secession of Mandarin and Cantonese. And if they get it, we could end up in another civil war like we did with the linguistical French-English civil war that we experienced during the charter crisis.
Well,
So
not
what,
a civil
what would
war.
happen? What would happen if we just said, you know what? Let's to reflect the way the country is going. We have one language, not even French.
Well, Quebec's not going to be happy about that. You need to recognize they've gone through enough problems already.
Why don't we switch to Esperanto?
How do you speak Esperanto?
What is that?
It's
Spanish?
an artificial language that somebody.
Why don't we create a new language?
That's a great idea. Let's all just learn a new language.
No,
Let's just,
yeah.
let's rewrite all the books in Esperanto and
Yeah.
At least we'll have a common culture and identity.
Exactly.
So I'm completely in agreement.
Or French. Why don't we just switch to French?
Oui, on peut
Sean?
parler de français.
Let's do it. That'll help. Then that'll help us. What? You're looking at me
Do
funny
you speak
there,
French?
Sandra.
Because I don't speak French.
Well, I can't believe it. You grew up on the same street as Michelle Lemon,
know,
and you
I
don't
know.
even speak French.
I'm going to
I
bring
don't-
up a very controversial topic.
That's how diverse this country is. 2 houses down, we can't even, we don't even see each other, and we don't even speak the same language.
I used to have a tutoring business, and I ran for about 7 years, and I collapsed it because it was marginally profitable. But I had clients from pretty much all over the place. I had some from Sri Lanka, some from Nigeria, some from Lebanon, whatever. They're just pretty cool people. I had 3 clients from Nigeria, and when the Afrocentric school got open, the second one,
Yeah.
I went to their house to do my tutoring sessions because I had 2 sessions a week, and I didn't say anything because I knew it was a touchy subject. So I sat down at the table, and their dad, who's this big 6'4" guy, he's about almost 200 pounds, he's built like a tank, he's like, Shawn, what do you think about the Afrocentric school thing? And I looked up, and everyone was staring at me. Like, it was just one of those moments, right? I looked up, and I said, well, I think everyone should go to the same school. Because that's exactly why we're sending our kids to the regular public school. We will never send our kids to the Afrocentric school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was tutoring their kids. Sosa, Kingsley, and Ivy, the oldest daughter
Yeah.
that they have. And they're all doing extremely well when they studied. 80s, high 70s. Kingsley ended up getting an A in math. He's the youngest. He was
Wow.
failing math when I started working with him. So they're also coming from a biased perspective because their parents are they went to church a lot, and their mom worked in the school system, right? So she was around people. She was around, caring people, right?
See, and that's another really good point, Shawn. Okay, because when you're talking about the language and talking about the culture, excuse me, you're also talking about the churches. Does that also mean now that we have to have mosques? Does that mean we have to have more, synagogues and more
people
whatever?
Can pray. This is a free country. You can go to whatever religious institution you want to, no problem, right?
But
if
doesn't one thing lead to the
if
other?
you start-
If you start to have these languages, and everybody's starting to have these languages, then the next thing would be,
Where's the limits on this? you
yes,
mean?
where does it stop? Start to do the
That's-
whole cultural
that-
thing and the whole
Yeah, are we
religious
going to have?
thing and the spiritual
Are we going to
thing.
have Sikh schools, white schools, black schools?
And then when you go to school, if you
how
have to
far do
say
you
every
go?
single prayer,
you're
going to be down at 3:00. No one's going to learn, right?
Where does
Because you're
someone
missing
put
every
their
single
foot down and say, hey, this is Canada? As you said before, we're trying to have a country here. Let's all go to the same school and learn together. It's just a lot more healthier. And why would we want to go back to apartheid?
Well, here's
I can tell you. Let me just say something because
Go ahead.
around the Afrocentric school debate, I interviewed a guy who was an educator from Chicago, and he was a black guy, and he was in town to right at about the time that they were arguing for the Afrocentric schools, and he was here to argue the case for Afro. Now he was an American black, so very different kind of
mentality.
history
Okay.
behind it than we have here in Canada. But he made the case quite strongly that for certain kids, black kids, who are growing up in a predominantly white system, it's just that they just don't do as well, and that for certain kids in certain instances that these Afrocentric schools do a better job with certain kids. And all I'm saying here is that it's not such a simple debate, because I'm with you on this one. I agree with you in principle on this, but I had a long debate with an educator who was passionate that the Afrocentric schools could serve some kids better. All I'm saying is it's not, like most issues when you really get
Sure
down
it could,
to
but
it,
so
it's
could
not so simple.
So could a school for all Chinese people or all white people. I mean, if you're around people who are like you, common sense
But-
suggests you'll most likely. It's not guaranteed, right? I mean,
Well,
there's always going to be people who do better than others.
But isn't that also the reason that we need to not focus on the differences? Because the reason I think, and I would love to have a chat with this educator, but the reason I think that, or the reason I feel that they maybe had different issues around learning or whatever the issues were because of the cultural differences, right? So they were coming in with more cultural differences and more ideas and thoughts around that cultural differences. So rather than let's focus on the common denominator and take away all of that, my personal opinion is that if these guys love their culture so much and their heritage, Why did they come to Canada?
Because we promote multiculturalism and they find that appealing. So that's
Okay,
our fault.
so because they want to learn another culture? Is that what you're saying? Or to have a better life?
This is the reason I'm against.
Because if they want to
I'm
learn
against
another,
it.
well, wait a second. If it's here to learn another culture, then why are they fighting so hard for their culture?
Because we don't give them any cultural capital or anything to buy into or anything to believe in. So we tell them we're a culturalist. Like, we don't promote our own and share it with them and say,
No, but you're saying,
you know, as you said before, join us, right? So we're moving in that
but
direction.
you're saying that they're coming here because they want to be part of a multicultural system. If that's the case, then why are you focusing on creating a bigger system, your own culture? If you want to be part of a multicultural system, you wouldn't be working harder to create your culture here.
But my culture here is already created.
No. If you were multicultural, let's say you were Chinese and you were coming here, okay? And you were coming here because you want to be part of a multicultural community. Then why are you bringing your Chinese community here?
Because that's what it encourages. When Trudeau
No,
went
then
backpacking.
it's about being more Chinese in Canada than it is about multiculturalism. Do you see what I'm saying?
That's why it's a hot potato. That's why we're not allowed to talk about these things. It's taboo. It's a taboo subject, and no one's ever talked about it actually, and it makes everyone uncomfortable.
It's only a touchy subject because we're all an ego.
Yeah. But Canada has a specific culture, and it's in everyone's interest to buy into it, and so they can make a contribution to it. Write the next chapter. You know, it could be a different chapter. It doesn't have to be the same. It doesn't have to look like the same. You don't have to look like me to live in Canada, but if you speak my language, I can be your friend. You can be my friend. We can have a coffee. We can talk about, on a very simplistic level.
Okay.
I mean,
I can agree with that, Shawn. I think that the government or Canada, in whatever way, needs to do that, to say, look, this is our country.
Mm-hmm.
This is our culture. This is how we do things. And
welcome to Canada.
Welcome. We want you to be a part of it, but please be a part of it. Because the worst thing that's going to happen is if we have ethnic groups, especially visible minority groups, who are not doing well economically, who are self-segregating into ghettos.
That's what's That's why
that is going to lead to a
Yeah.
kind of situation that we've seen in Lebanon and other failed states.
That's why the poverty rate of countries near the bottom are the countries from failed states. We don't give them any identity when they come here, so they do huddle into their culture, and it's not their fault. They're scared. They don't know how Canada works, so they huddle in their groups, and the world is changing around them very rapidly.
So why are they coming in the first place then? For
Okay.
a better life? I know we have to
Yeah,
go.
that's why they're coming. They're coming for a better life, and that's
Okay,
the bottom
so
line.
then I don't understand. If they're coming for a better life, why do you want to maintain that culture? Because obviously that culture didn't serve you over there.
Well, you need to speak to those people, or perhaps the government needs to make the
Like
point.
if you're
But-
going to start anew, start anew.
Okay, Shawn, we don't have a lot of time left. Anything else you want to just put on the table here quickly?
Yeah, there's a book called Delectable Lie by Salim Mansour. He came from Bangladesh 30 years ago to Canada. It's a best-selling book. It's called A Liberal Repudiation of Multiculturalism. He's a professor at Western Ontario University, and he was a member of the Alliance Party in the 90s. And I don't know if he won his seat or not, but he was as frustrated as anybody else. He rejects the hyphenated Canadian model, and he says, I'm as Canadian as anybody else, and I think that's what everyone should strive to be, or we should be promoting here.
Well, I know one thing. When you go to Milton, you'll find a lot of Sikh kids with turbans playing hockey.
And that's so cool.
Yeah.
That is,
Will they be allowed to wear it on the ice though? Will the helmet fit over it?
Well, you maybe gotta get a special helmet, but I don't see why not.
you know what? Why don't we focus? When one thing is for sure, okay, we are all human, and we all bleed when we get cut. We all need to eat. We all cry. We all love whatever. If we focus on our rather than the cultural thing, if we just focus on our needs, our wants, our desires, forget the drama, which is the culture. We will not have a problem.
I think the Harper government's doing that by requiring documentation, the provability to be able to speak English for new Canadians.
Well, I hope you're right, because my biggest fear is that everybody, including the Harper government, is just paying lip service to immigration reform. So
But they'll also have a job offer as well, which will make them happier. Like, if you know English and you're working in your own field, there's a greater chance you'll be happier and more likely to become a contributing member of society. So I can't see a downside to that. I've evaluated. Yeah, there is risk. Like, maybe they'll be taking a Canadian's job, but
if they're doing what you're saying they're doing, and you're questioning that they're doing what he's saying,
we have to wait and see how the
I'm
system.
questioning that.
We have to see a couple of years of results to make a determination whether or not this is a good policy.
See, my biggest thing.
Sounds good though.
My big conspiracy theory is, and I don't necessarily believe it, Shawn, is that the powers that be, whoever they are, and acting through whatever agents, whatever political parties, really want to see
Canada destroyed.
art, culture destroyed,
Annihilated.
Canada destroyed, flood it with immigrants, let it degenerate into
To like a third world
tribal
country?
warfare.
We can handle immigration. We just can't handle mass immigration. It's got to be done responsibly.
Yeah.
It's got to be done in an
And
ethical manner.
geographically.
And
Yeah,
in-
because 75% of
Non-concentrat-
people go to the three main cities,
Yeah.
Toronto, Vancouver,
Yeah,
Montreal.
yeah.
House in Vancouver's 800,000. House in Toronto's 425,000 on average. I was looking into it. No one can buy these houses. First-time home buyers have to live in the suburbs.
Well, and as
it's
Joe,
ridiculous.
our financial guy,
Mm-hmm.
was saying that a lot of the housing market is due to the Chinese.
well, due to international, it's now an international
Well, in
market.
Vancouver, right?
Everybody
No,
wants to have
no.
everybody wants to have a place in Toronto.
And so people internationally, the Chinese people in China are actually buying places
The
here.
condos and-
yeah, and increasing the markets for Canadians here. So this is how we're being affected, even not in our own-
Offshore investment or
Yeah,
offshore money.
yes.
Okay, Sean, we're right down to the last couple of seconds. Anything else you want to mention? We didn't hardly even talk about Trudeau.
Trudeau's like policy of Charter of Rights was good, but his multicultural component was bad for the unity of the country. And if we're ever going to become a unified country, we need to get rid of the multicultural component and keep the English and French as is, because we have already enough problems dealing with those two linguistic.
You know, here's
peoples.
what my great hope is for the best hope of multiculturalism, and that was that I think what Trudeau was maybe trying to do, if he was being a good guy and not being a Vatican agent who's just trying to destroy the country as part of a big international conspiracy, is that if we in Canada can learn to get along with everyone else in this country, then maybe we can be a model for the world, for people all over the world to get along with one another.
Isn't that what the United States was trying to be?
I don't think so.
The United States has a melting pot out of one many, e pluribus unum. John Adams and the founders of the
What was that? Say that again.
E pluribus unum, or out of one
Oh,
many. So
okay.
they don't have as many problems as we have. They take people and make them one of them, like an American.
Yeah, but
So-
they
Well,
do
they got
by
other
force
problems.
and fear,
They
right?
got other
yeah, they
problems.
do, but that's the least of their
Okay,
problems.
so forget
you know?
multiculturalism.
Okay.
Let's just go to multidimensionalism.
Okay, we'll have a whole show on that. Okay, Sandra. Okay, Sean. Sean, let's give out all your contact info. People want to get in, stay in touch
Thank
with
you,
you.
Sean.
What's the best way for them to do
Thanks
that?
for inviting me on your show. My email is sean@endofees.ca, ENDOFFEES.ca, and my number is 416-557-5666.
All right, and do you have a website or blog or anything like that? Or-
I've got a research site called endofees.ca, but I no longer contribute to it. It was just something I did. I did financial book reviews at a certain time in my life, and
Okay.
Okay, all
I
right.
haven't added any new ones for a while.
And Sean,
So-
is that SEAN?
It's SHAWN.
Okay.
At endofees.ca. That's my email address. So.
All
Wow.
right, Sean. Always great to have you
Interesting
on.
Yeah,
discussion.
thanks for inviting me on your show. Hugh.
Okay. All right. Oh, by the way, just a couple things about Trudeau. I should say, on the negative side, so apparently after he retired from being prime minister, he went back to Russia, where he got debriefed because he was really a Soviet spy. Top secret. Don't say anything. And the whole FLQ thing, it's all manufactured. Okay. All right. Let's take a little break. We're going to come back with Martin Weiner. And who's the fellow we're going to be talking about, Martin?
We'll be talking about Kent Keel, but
Kent
basically
Keel.
Kent Keel, and all about
Free will.
Free will
science undermines
and the
free will.
science. Is there free will or not? It's been a big debate. We're going to get into it with
There is, you have to
Martin Weiner
fight for it.
right
you
after
have
this.
to get momentum going. Or
Okay,
something.
let's play some Broken Bricks. We'll come back with Martin right after this.
Cool.
Broken bricks, how appropriate.
Yeah.
Natural is so very consequential now. It comes so freely with the territory, but it means so little to me now. The boys, they're back with their eyes to the floor, are breaking down the chains that hold the palace to the door. Just to write a silly pop song like they do in the charts. Just to write a silly pop song like they do in the charts. Flannel shirt and a Fender box is not enough to make me care. But it's your lack of devotion that makes me sweat almighty prayer. The kids, the street with the second-hand beat are clinically clumsy and belly chant. Ends with the forward slant. But you ride it like you wrote it when you're riding tanks down low. You ride it like you wrote it when you're riding tanks down low. A holy Bible and a microphone is not enough to make your cause. You've got to twist it till it fits just right, or fix it like the cardinal laws. The girl with the sling and the Cheshire grin will make you wanna bleed and shout. They'll break and they'll bruise you till you think just right, and make it so you give up the fight. Just to write a silly box like they do in the charts. Just to write a silly box like they do in the charts. Something like a belly chant. Ends with the forward slant. But you ride it like you wrote it when you're riding tanks down low. You ride it like you wrote it when you're riding tanks down low.
It was inside Parliament today that the federal cabinet was in almost constant session discussing the kidnappings.
With the pompadour, see he's feeling for some healing, boy that ain't really new. You've got some reeling and a rocking like he's Mr. Johnny Hurricane too. Got to wait by the gate where the lovers debate over who's using who. Will you just keep it straight? You know those cats are really jumping when the clock hits a quarter to 8. You know it's Saturday night and I ain't got nothing at all. You know it's Saturday night and I ain't got nothing at all.
And welcome back to the show, and that's the Broken Bricks that we're listening to today.
Nice
and,
music.
Very nice music. And we got Martin Weiner joining us. Martin, it's been a while since you've been here.
It has been a while, and the temperature in the studio has dropped by 2 degrees, and that's 1 degree per year I've been here. So I'm hoping to come back, but it's much nicer, much more comfortable.
It was hotter before the last
it
time
was
you were here.
hotter.
I think you were here in the middle of the summer, obviously, right?
No, around this
No?
time.
Really?
So yeah.
So we don't believe in air
Okay.
conditioning
Well, who doesn't?
with the studio.
We do. In fact, we have it on right now, even though it's only May. Okay, Martin. Okay, great to see you. We should probably mention you're a regular contributor to Good News Toronto magazine.
I am a regular contributor, and also I blog regularly. That would be www.martin.winer.com. So, and on that blog, you'll find all sorts of issues, the kind that we're discussing today. The reason I started it was because so many issues that I found interesting weren't making it to the news. And so I was like, why didn't I know about this? Why didn't I know about that? Why have I never heard about this? And I started my blog, and you'll find all sorts of issues ranging from archaeology to theology.
But are they all good news, though?
Okay, no, the Good News Toronto is a separate paper, and that deals with good news in Toronto. That paper's trying to resolve a bias in the media where everything was negative. So that's not my paper. I'm just a contributor there.
Okay, but when
my
you do
blog,
write for that one, you always write good news
it's
stories.
always good news.
Right, okay.
Yes.
Okay, so do you have good news for us today, Martin?
No, that's what.
Aw, I'm not.
Let's get into the bad news.
Jeez.
Well, actually, I would say it's good news, and I would just say that actually it might make our society more compassionate, more understanding. So, just basically, in a short 1-minute summation, I came across a story of a researcher. His name is Kent Keel. He works out of the University of New Mexico. And what he was doing is he was going to death row inmates and running an fMRI scan on them. Now, we all know MRI scans are kind of like a picture of the brain.
Yeah.
fMRI is like a movie of the brain. You can see the brain working. You can see processes moving across the brain.
Wow.
So when he did this,
Uh-huh.
when he did this on the death row inmates, he discovered that so many of them had this exact same defect in a specific region of the brain called the paralimbic system.
Okay.
I'll get into it. And that actually, it played back into a theory or a problem that I've been having ever since I was a teenager. And the paralimbic system is a system that helps humans process emotional responses. And one of the things that's crucial to knowing the difference between right and wrong is empathy. And what's required of empathy is a sense of how you would feel and an understanding of how other people would feel. And that's an emotional response. So if the paralimbic system is damaged, then perhaps these people inevitably would commit a crime. And if it was inevitable that they're going to commit a crime, should we treat them as criminals or as a victim of this defect?
Right.
Now, I'm not saying that this is a very prominent thing. I'm not saying that, the bulk majority of prison inmates suffer from this. But it starts to bring up a question, for people who do suffer from this, should prison be more like a psychiatric ward where we're caring for you and nurturing you as opposed to punishing you for something that was not your fault?
Okay, so what strikes me about this is that, and this leads to all kinds of different subject areas, right? Like the whole free will versus fate discussion, the meaning of life, the validity of religions and law. But one of the things that strikes me about this is new scientific information, right?
Right.
So could this not, if we're struggling with how to deal this in the legal system, right? Could it not just be something that defense attorneys could start to incorporate into their defenses?
Well, that's a very, very good question. And in fact, the news came to light because Kent Keel testified on behalf, and this is the first time it happened, of a criminal who was on death row, and his name was Brian Duggan. And death row cases typically go through what's called a mitigating circumstances hearing. So basically, this is where you get to talk about your childhood. How rough your childhood was, anything to basically ask for pity from the jury. Kent Keel testified for the first time using this new technology, because it is new. And actually, the first time the jury came down, it failed to reach it had to be a unanimous verdict. And they failed to reach it. They asked for more time and eventually did reach a unanimous verdict. But this was the first time that this type of evidence had appeared in court. And so
what was the verdict?
The verdict eventually was yes, he would be put to death.
Okay, so he was still found guilty.
He was still found guilty.
Okay.
But the technology is improving, the numbers are improving, and you have to understand that OJ got off with DNA evidence that was what was it, 1 billion to 1 against OJ. So new science is not trustworthy, but as science now, I believe that DNA evidence in a jury has more weight than it did in the 1990s.
Okay, but even just to back up a bit, before we even decide if it's a legal issue, you were saying using this in your legal argument, shouldn't we even be looking at whether this is a legal issue or a moral issue?
It is. I want to stick to the moral issue because
if what you're saying is true, should they even be held in a legal system, or should they be medically?
That's exactly what I'm
treated?
getting at. And so the bar, the level of proof required in the legal system is at the time that you committed the crime, were you able to differentiate from right from wrong?
Right.
And my argument is for people with this specific disability, they never could distinguish between right and wrong as far as psychopathy is concerned. So I want to introduce the term psychopathy and make sure everybody knows what it means. Psychopathy is the inability to realize the effect of your actions on other people. You have no empathy. There's a test for this. It's called the HARE test, H-A-R-E test. It's a interview that's highly structured, and it runs on and on, and it's on a scale of out of 40. Keel also ran this test against the prisoners in New Mexico and discovered that this particular fellow, Mr. Brian Duggan, was a 38.5 out of 40, meaning virtually completely psychopathic. So again, his crime was almost completely predictable. And I'm specifically not mentioning the details of his crime because I want to avoid the emotions. Because if you read what he did, you'd want him hung 3 times.
Well, okay, so psychopaths, right?
Mm-hmm.
So basically, he's a psychopath.
That's correct.
So is this a brain condition? Is this an indication of psychopathy?
This specific test that he's running is a test
No,
of
not the test itself, because didn't you say that there was a brain defect?
Yes.
Right.
So that brain defect is theorized to contribute to psychopathy.
To contribute. So everyone
cause.
who has this brain
Defect will typically be psychopath.
So,
so
okay,
it might be easier.
Yeah.
Might it be easier to test for this particular brain defect, which seems a little more objective and less subjective than this test?
Well, that's exactly right. So the HARE test, HARE test, was the
Yeah.
predecessor to this fMRI test.
I see.
So as science evolves, by the way, and this fMRI data is coming out, because fMRI is new. It's only about 5-7 years old. We're learning more and more about people's brains, and you'd be amazed what we're learning. We're able to predict thoughts now before they happen. If we ask you a question, do you like black or blue, and you're under the fMRI question, before you say blue, we'll be able to tell you you're about to say blue.
Okay,
Oh,
I can
that's
explain that from a spiritual experience or perspective. I can totally tell you what's going on there. Now we're getting into that whole area of the emotional, what we were talking about at the very top of the show, which is about the emotional and mental physics. This ties right into all of that stuff. So it's so cool how that works. And even I call it a psychosophy. Created that word, which is a combination of psychology and philosophy. Yeah, but anyway, so it ties right in. It's amazing how that works. But my question is okay. So if we can start to understand this, okay, the next thing I guess we would have to ask is, okay, so let's say you have the brain defect. Okay, and so now you know you're more prone. So if we can determine that at an early age, say, then we can start to kind of work with that. But okay, so now even though you're more prone to that, do you still know the difference between right and wrong? Can you be trained to know the difference between right and wrong?
Okay.
Can you know that it's like even just by memory or an intellectual, forget the whole feeling thing. Can you just know, even if I don't have the emotion and I can kill somebody without question?
Can you be trained?
If I'm told, you don't do that.
Can you be trained? Because you've got, I noticed he's got that Steven Pinker book on your sheet
The Blank
there.
Slate, yes, I do.
And he also talks about the plastic brain, does he not?
Norm Deutsch is a Toronto psychiatrist who's world famous for neuronal plasticity.
Oh my God, these words are so big.
Sorry?
These words are so big.
Neuronal, I was going to explain
neurons, okay.
Plasticity, the ability to change. But Norm Deutsch is so interesting. He said that there's people with a half brain that have been able to train themselves using this technique, neuronal plasticity, to function virtually normally.
Yeah, I know.
So now we're in 2 different issues at once. If you detect it, can you fix it? And to be honest, I don't know. I can't answer that question.
I guess it's still very new,
we don't
right?
know. But now, having not detected it, okay, this person, obviously it wasn't detected at that time, and it wasn't corrected or treated. Was this person really in a state to know the difference between right and wrong? And I would say no, not with this level of defect, and not with that test result on the HARE scale, HARE.
Okay, but still, that doesn't mean he might not be able to be trained. He doesn't know the difference, but if you're told,
Right.
don't do that.
Well, first of all, yeah, we don't know. Maybe there is a way with Deutsch's understanding of how the brain works. Maybe we can overcome these brain defects.
Maybe.
But we don't know yet.
But it occurs to me, and it's just in a lot of reading that I've done, that the main thing for understanding the difference between right and wrong, and it's a very critical issue, is for some reason we have to understand that pain ourselves. That we have
Empathy.
to understand.
Yeah.
We have to understand that that we have to be able to feel the pain that we're causing in others ourselves. It involves something called mirror neurons. These are also a recent discovery.
What's it called?
Mirror neurons.
Okay, so it's
I
mirroring.
just saw on your face that you went like this. Okay? My mirror neurons realized that I would make that face in a state of confusion. So I understood by reading your face that you were in a state of confusion.
And you read that well.
So, and these are all okay, but these are all new things that are emerging. So I'm saying like this is an emerging field. So I'm saying the way that we treat criminals now is really going to have to be revamped. But if you don't mind, I'd like to take a trip back to my teens, if that's okay.
Sure.
When I was a teenager, I had it all worked out. And don't most teenagers? You know,
Yeah,
we're
I do
smart
too.
and we know everything. I was modern Orthodox Jewish. That would be walking down Bathurst Street. If you've ever done it, you see people in black coats and black hats. That's not me. I wore a yarmulke, which is similar to Hugh's headdress, just a bit smaller. And I believed in God and everything, okay? And I had it all worked out. Because the biggest problem for a theist, somebody who believes in religion, is that you're living in a world with God where you know God has to exist, but there's terrible things happening all around you. And it seems like a godless world. So how do you reconcile it? Here's what I did. It was very easy. So the first thing is that we all had a minimum amount of intelligence. Enough intelligence to know the difference from right and wrong.
Okay.
Einstein knew that murder was wrong. We knew that murder was wrong. And everyone, it was considered axiomatic to me that everyone had the ability to determine right from wrong. With that in mind, then God had given us free will to do with as we please. Why didn't we see God every day? Because, you know, many children of stars, like stars,
Celebrities,
famous
you mean?
celebrities,
Okay.
Yeah.
they have to live in the shadow of their
Right.
parents.
Okay.
So God is the ultimate star, and he said, I don't want you to live in my shadow. I'm removing myself so that you can use your free will and the talents that I've given you to determine right from wrong for you to be able to figure out how to be happy in life. And so with that, I said, well, some people are suffering, but they're suffering because they've used their free will and their ability to tell right from wrong in the wrong way, and pain is an ultimate informer, and one day they'll come back to the right path. And I said to myself, okay, well, I now I know God exists. Everybody's going to be okay in the end. Let's go play tennis. I was a teenager, okay, and my tennis game improved, and
There's your secret to life right there. Let's go play
and I
tennis.
was very, very pleased with myself. Okay, I'm about 14 years old. Give me a break. It was pretty good.
Yeah,
But
that's
then,
pretty clever, actually.
But then I started to read about this guy named Charles Whitman. Now, this is the Texas shooter. He went up the clock tower in 1966 and started shooting people.
Okay,
It was a very
yeah.
famous case. And I read from his diary, and I'm just going to read a few extracts because it started to bug me. It says, this is Charles Whitman before he committed his crimes. I do not quite understand what it is that compels me to type this letter. Perhaps it's to leave some vague reason for the actions I've recently performed. I do not really understand myself these days. I'm supposed to be average, reasonably intelligent, and a young man. However, lately, I've been a victim of many unusual and irrational thoughts. And I said, that doesn't sound like such an insane guy. It doesn't sound like a guy who can't tell right from wrong what's going on. So let me just continue.
Okay.
To whom it may concern, I've just taken my mother's life. I'm very upset over having done it. However, I feel if there's a heaven, she's there now. I truly am sorry. Let there be no doubt in your mind that I loved this woman with all my heart. And I'm starting to... This guy shot 47 people? Then he goes, he killed his wife as well. He said on this one, he said, please use my life insurance policy to pay off my debts and donate the rest to a mental health foundation so that research can prevent future tragedies of this type. Now I'm really scratching. What? This does not sound like an insane guy
Yeah.
or somebody who...
Yeah.
I'm expecting diatribes of hate and I hate
Yeah.
all people at the
Yeah.
university. I'm not hearing it.
Yeah.
Finally, he says, I've talked to a doctor, he meant a psychiatrist, for 2 hours and tried to convey to him my fears that I felt overwhelming violent impulses. After one visit, I never saw the doctor again, but I've been fighting mental turmoil all alone, seemingly to no avail. I'm not hearing diatribes of hatred. I'm not hearing racism. I'm not hearing anything I'm expecting to. And the final thing, and this really threw a monkey wrench into my whole works here, was he requested an autopsy on his brain because he felt that something had gone wrong. Because prior to this, he was a very good student, a good husband, good wife, good son. They did the autopsy. Now get this. there was a tumor that had developed in his brain that was pressing against his amygdala. And that's a region of the brain that's controlling your fight and flight response. So now I'm really upset, theologically, personally.
Yes.
Because I'm like, hang on a second. If there's this real thing and it's pushing against a region of his brain and it's causing him to be angry all the time and have violent impulses, I said, this guy doesn't have free will. And so this is a huge theological problem now, because why would God create somebody who inevitably is going to commit a crime or cause him to have a tumor that would inevitably cause him to commit a crime? And so this was one of the contributing factors. There were many more that led to my eventual drive toward atheism, but this was one of them.
Okay.
So
Obviously an instrumental one.
I'm just saying, but Martin, who, you know, and this is not, who are you to try to understand the mind of God, right? Do you know what I mean? It's
Well, he's just trying to
that,
understand it from his perspective.
I understand, but I'm just saying this is the argument that this is the what some theological people would argue to
Go
you,
ahead.
the atheist,
Yep,
right?
yep.
And say, you know, the mind of God is beyond any kind of human understanding, and we don't know what. I also think
got you.
I also think what you're trying, where you're coming from here is that you are trying. You have a sense of justice. It's your sense of justice,
Morality.
that you're bringing to this whole issue, because you feel that what is just in this case, right?
right.
And presuming that God is just, because I don't think any of us would want to think that
Otherwise,
God is not just. But if God is just, how can He allow this? So just the
So, okay.
theological argument is: can we even begin to
there.
think that we can understand the mind
well,
of God?
as talking to Orthodox rabbis, they have answers too,
Yeah.
and their answers to which one
Everybody's got an
satis-
answer.
Well,
Everybody's got an
they-
opinion.
Their answers are that there are cases that occur in the Talmud and in the world that there are instances where God has removed free will from people such that they could be an instrument of His
To some other
divine providence,
some other greater good.
But okay, you know what? I would like to.
which I reject.
I would like to challenge
that's
that
their
whole
answer.
free will thing. I
Right.
think he had free will. I think this guy had free will, and I think his letter showed that he had free will. He was clearly rational
He was
in that letter.
he was clearly rational in the letter.
Okay, yes, and he also went to psychiatrist for 2 hours. So why couldn't he have chosen to use his free will and write this letter and walk away or move out before he actually killed his wife and his mother and all
So,
those shootings?
That's
there's free
where I
will
say
there, too.
That's where I say he didn't have free will, in the sense though that if this thing
But
is
he was
present,
rational, though, Martin. This man was very intelligent.
intelligent and rational in part, but he had a tumor pressing specifically against his anger center, which was basically warping his rationality.
Right. So it was actually blocking it. Let's say at that moment that he killed but that's a lot of pressure. Okay. So when he killed all those people,
47.
47, did he kill his mother and his wife at the same time?
Previously.
Was there a
The
period
same
of
day.
time?
The same day.
Hours in between?
Hours.
So at what point? Why was he rational after the fact and not before?
He was rational before and after the
So
fact.
then why
and
couldn't he
partially
removed himself from the situation?
Well, this is a huge issue in psychiatry.
So I think there is free will, though. I think there is free, because if he didn't write a letter like that, if he wrote the letter you expected, like I hate the world and I'm angry and this and that, where he had absolutely no rationale and he was absolutely not in control, I would agree with that free will thing.
Well,
But to me, he chose to write the letter.
Well, if you don't mind, let me bring in a legal concept here. It's called constructive dismissal. You can be dismissed from your job. You can be fired, right? And there's another form of dismissal called constructive dismissal, where they make your job so miserable for you because they want you out, that basically you can argue they basically fired me.
That's right. Right.
So
I've heard of that.
I would think in this case that there should be a concept of free will, and the lack of free will, and the constructive lack of free will. If your brain operates in such a way that it's constantly telling you with such force that you must commit violent acts, I believe in the concept of constructively or effectively he had no free will. Yes, he had moments where he could write rationally because the rest of his brain was still working, but he had...
Then why didn't he kill himself?
He probably would have. to be honest. The state troopers got to him first.
But why wouldn't he kill himself instead of killing everybody else before he killed the others?
Well, we don't know exactly how this tumor affected his brain, but we understand that it caused anger, and that anger needed to be expressed, and not necessarily against himself. So, anger, okay, is just an emotion.
Yes.
Now, in a healthy level, anger could be very dualistic.
And it can be constructive. It can actually be constructive.
I could be angry about the state of economics in Canada and take
Right.
positive action.
That's right. Yeah.
Or I could go out and blow up a government building.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
We just got spied on by CSIS for that. But in this case, I'm saying that his anger was so overwhelming that it wasn't the type of anger where he's going to say, oh, gee, I'm really angry, let me go start a charity. And it was a very primal anger. The amygdala, by the way, is a very primal part of the brain. If you have phobias, fears of snakes and fears of snakes and mice or whatever that is,
Rodents.
it's your amygdala that's responsible.
Okay.
And what's very important about the amygdala is that it's impossible almost to ignore. People who suffer from anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder,
Okay.
it's their amygdala that is at work. It's basically an emotional underscoring. It says, this is dangerous, and it yells at you. Okay? So if you're in a situation where you've been in a war, but now you hear fireworks, it will yell at you, and you will be in a tremendous panic, and it's out of your control. It's a relic of evolution. So I'd say that if something's pressing on your amygdala, basically your higher faculties are compromised, even though he could write that letter. His fire.
But there, to me, I mean, there had to be some sort of premeditation. So if there's some sort of premeditation, because he did go and speak.
He bought the guns.
Yeah. So at what point? There was plenty of opportunity for him to turn that around. So I don't buy the free will or the no free will argument in this particular case. I know what you're saying, and probably in certain situations that would be the case. But I don't think in this particular case. I think this is a case of a tumor. But I think if he had acted, if he had acted selflessly, he would have just killed himself.
Again, the amygdala is so overpowering that I don't think he had the capability of saying, gee, I think I could figure out that I would just kill myself instead of killing all these people. It's that overpowering. It goes beyond. Okay, your cerebral cortex evolved millions and millions of years after the amygdala. The amygdala and your lower brain functions, they're millions and millions of years older, and they're much more powerful. And that's why people with anxiety, that's why psychology is so hard. If we were all rational, and we're not, we have the capability for rational with our cerebral cortex, but we can't always control in fact, we rarely can control our emotions.
You know what? Actually, it makes me think, what year was this that this happened?
1966.
So maybe he actually felt he was being compassionate when he killed his mother and his wife. Maybe he was the breadwinner, and maybe he felt they would have no one to take care of. But then that wouldn't explain the 47 other people he killed. So
no,
there goes
and they
that
were
theory.
random. So basically, what I'm trying to drive at is that free will is not as obvious a gift as we all take it. We all think we have free will, but as this fMRI technology advances, well, let me explain to you this way. So Steven Pinker wrote a book called The Blank Slate, and it talks about the tabula rasa. The tabula rasa is an older theory that says that we're all blank slates. Everything that we are has been taught and learned. Okay. But it's been completely outmoded, demoted. The problem was that they ran studies on twins that were separated at birth by adoption, and you'd be surprised at the similarities. Propensity toward alcoholism, identical. Small things like people that play with elastics. Both twins who'd grown up on other sides of the country, never talked to each other, never met each other, both play with elastics all day. So it really argued against the idea that we're just blank slates, and it really argued for the case that we're largely pre-wired. So as much as we hail free will and we say, yes, we all have free will and we're all individuals, yes and no. That's what makes this this topic so interesting for me, because growing up I thought, yeah, for sure, I am who I am, and I can be whoever I want to be, and everyone else is whoever they are, and they can be who they want to be, and they're all on a path toward perfection, or at least self-fulfillment. This argues against that to some degree. At least it warns us. It does that much. It warns us. It says that you have to become more cognizant of the forces that drive you. And it says that it tells psychologists that, you know, a lot of your patients that are coming to see you that are driving you nuts because they're constantly anxious no matter what you're trying, that there are built-in functions in your brain that you have to be aware of. It basically, to put a positive spin, a good news story on this, and there is good news that comes out of this, is that basically we have to be more self-aware than we are right now, because we're not self-aware enough right now. FMR, all this is telling us is that we have to be more aware of the drives that are innate inside of our brains and minds and souls, and work with them and through them. So I guess if I want to end on a good news line, I guess that science is actually, first of all, it is undermining free will in a sense, in as much as if we don't understand what's going on, then okay. But I think that as we evolve and learn more and more about psychology, that we actually have the potential to become more self-aware and actually become better people. There may be new diagnostic tests that emerge out of this to tell you that you have a propensity to be a selfish person, an egoistic person, a person, you know, who an insular person. So I think we're driving toward more self-awareness, but with huge caveats, such as Texas shootings and death row inmates.
And maybe these are happening to help us understand that more. Unfortunately, at their at people's expense, but you know it's turning a negative into a positive because we're trying to learn from it.
Well, yes. Well,
for the benefit of people down the line.
I hope so. I hope we can do that. That's actually why I wanted to come on the show. Basically, was to say that free will isn't as big a thing as we think it is, and we have to realize that there are forces that drive us, and we have to become aware of them. So
interesting. And maybe the good news, maybe free will is a bit of a moving target, and as we get more of this scientific knowledge, maybe we're also going to learn that the brain is plastic, and we can overcome these difficulties once we know about them.
And that's my greatest hope.
Yeah.
But I mean, even now there are things that people can do. If you explore yourself a bit more, you can, or take personality tests, you can start to discover what your flaws are, what your strengths are, and try and work through them.
But you gave us two really good examples, Martin, because one was an actual brain defect from birth, and one was an actual incident where this person perhaps grew the tumor.
No, for sure.
Later on.
Yeah, he was normal.
So you wouldn't be able to predict that with
no,
him,
you would not
correct?
be able to predict it. But
whereas
I'm talking
with a defect in the brain, you might be able to. Right?
Right. But I'm saying, okay, now just going to the broader sense, not a criminal sense, I'm saying we all have defects. All of us.
Excuse me, Hugh's perfect.
No.
Sadly. We all
Kidding.
have defects. And basically, as you say, this sort of thing just might be a wake-up call to say, you know, let's be more self-aware to become better people.
Okay.
Okay, so just one last thing. Okay,
Yeah.
so do you want to know how to become a legal psychopath?
How?
Play the stock market.
A
Be a
legal-
trader.
Oh,
a
yeah.
trader. Because what
Did
they
I
said.
mention that?
No, because I don't know if you saw this article, but about a year and a half ago, I received an article by somebody. They did a study, and they said people who are traders actually have far lower empathic abilities and are actually verging on psychopathic. So that's a required skill set or
Thank you
skill.
so much for bringing that up. As a conclusion, and this is a funny conclusion, the same hair test that they ran on these criminals, where they came out 38.5 out of 40, they ran on the general population, and they found out that general felons, non-violent crimes, lower misdemeanors, etc., and corporate CEOs both ranked 20 out of 40 on average.
And that's high, right?
It's 20 out of 40. It's
Okay,
in the
halfway.
middle,
Okay.
halfway. But I'm just saying it's a very interesting fact that they both show up on the psychopathic
Isn't
scale.
that, yes.
So
yes.
just tying on to your point
yeah,
there.
and because that's what they said, that the traders have, to be a successful trader, you have to have very little empathic ability. And you are bordering psychopathic, what they consider clinically psychopathic.
Yes.
So there's a legal way to be a psychopath in the system.
Yeah.
That's good.
Isn't that interesting?
Because the system rewards psychopaths.
That's actually true.
Yeah.
That is actually true.
So that's maybe a wake-up call for us to reinvent our systems.
Yes.
Can I just mention something else that's
Please.
sort of related to this? I saw a presentation that somebody doing brain research had identified a certain kind of propensity to fundamentalist religious thinking.
Yes.
Did you see this? Yes. And they were contemplating developing a vaccine that could kind of nip this tendency towards religious fundamentalism in the bud. But once we start to get to that kind of level of scientific analysis and control, though, you know, we start to maybe we're starting to erode the human condition itself.
And free will, whatever that means.
By the way, and this pre-testing, I didn't get to it, but basically brings up the issues similar to the movie The Minority Report. For those who haven't seen it, it's Tom Cruise and basically three psychic mediums predict a crime about a half hour before it's going to happen reliably.
Okay.
Tom Cruise and his team go out and catch the man or the woman just as about to plunge the knife, and they prevent the murder, and the person is incarcerated. And there's all sorts of moral issues around that, because, I mean, if you knew it was going to happen, couldn't you instead, you know, why does the person have to be incarcerated, and why couldn't you have caught it a bit earlier and retrained them? So there's tons of issues around this type of testing, moral issues.
So I expect you'll probably keep your eye on the situation, Martin, as it develops. So
Are you still an atheist?
I still am, yes.
Okay.
Okay. Well, Martin, we look forward to having you back the next time and carrying on this conversation either on this topic or something else. But before we go, of course, people can read your articles in Good News Toronto, but where else can people get in touch?
Good News Toronto is one place. My main blog, though, is Martin, the letter C, WINER, everyone misspells it, .com.
MartinCweiner.com, yeah.
That's correct. And you'll see, the fellow's name, if you want to read this particular article, is KIEHL. There's a search box at the top of my blog, and it will bring up the article.
Okay.
And you'll find all sorts of articles there, so please visit.
All right, MartinCweiner.com. Martin, great to have you on as always. Thanks for doing this.
It was a pleasure. Thanks for having us. Having me.
And I think that's the show, Sandra.
Wow.
What do you think?
See, I can't even high-five you because you're so far away.
You can high-five me after the show. Maybe while we play the music that we go out with and run the credits over.
Okay.
Okay.
Amazing discussion, amazing guests today.
Yeah.
Really, two very passionate
It was
people.
good. Yeah,
very
and nice and
passionate
relaxed.
people.
Able to get right into the issues. So
Yeah, it was
that's
really,
great.
really cool. Really good discussions.
Okay. Well,
My
I
brain's
guess.
hurting now, though, from
is it?
Monday. My brain's sore.
Okay. All right. So we're going to take off. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. We'll see you
Thank
tomorrow
you, guys.
for more Liquid Lunch right here on ThatChannel.com. See you
See
then.
you next time.
Little boy dressed in blue with a pompadour dude. See, he's feeling for some healing, boy, that ain't really new. You've got some reeling and a rocking like he's Mr. Johnny Hurricane too. Got to wait by the gate where the lovers debate over who's using who. Will you just keep it straight? You know those cats are really jumping when the clock hits a quarter to 8. You know it's Saturday night and I ain't got nothing at all. You know it's Saturday night and I ain't got nothing at all. See my tongue, yes it's done with the lover's supply. Keep it coming till it's running low and stupid and dry. You know it's got that magic, something that you just can't really deny. Don't mistake me, let me should take you to a lover's retreat, where succeeding is just feeding you the answers to screams. When I howl, you just cower like you already admitted defeat. You know it's Saturday night, and I ain't got nothing at all. You know it's Saturday night, and I ain't got nothing at all. Just a child, young and wild, like a boy of 16. Set his sights on those heights where we're not out so clean. You know it's gotta hit hard when the light comes in for a clean. Don't you worry or be sorry about the blue little boy. You see every weekend he's round the block a blue soldier toy. So rest assured he'll be cured when the moon comes hanging in joy.